Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our second panel session for today for the International Day of Forest that we've celebrated here in the UNEC Forestry, UNEC and FAO Forestry and Timber section. This afternoon, we're going to have a session on sustainable paper and paperboard. And I will first give you a quick run through some of the rules for this afternoon for the meeting, how we are planning to conduct the meeting before we have the official opening by our chief of the section. So this event, you can find interpretation in languages Russian, French, and English. So please select your language you prefer. The interpretation, we will also try to look at the chat box in those languages and reply to those questions. The meeting will be recorded. All the presentations will be made available on our website after the session. And due to technical constraints with the many speakers and many participants, we will have no microphone open for those who are not speakers. And I will really ask you to use and make big use of the chat function to raise any questions, to comment on the presentations, to ask questions that we then convey to the speakers. I say our moderator will then convey the questions to the speakers. Thanks also to all the speakers who agreed to give their presentation, and the presentations will be very short. So we really depend on your input from the chat box for questions, to have a discussion taking up and to really see what are your questions and let us know what you want to have discussed. We will also have some polls, you will see. So get ready to be interactive with us and give us some feedback on the polls, which we have prepared. So this will come in a minute. So with this very interactive plan for the discussion, I'm happy to hand the floor now to Liliana Anovatsia-Kapp, our chief of the UNEC FAO Forest and Timber section, for some welcoming notes.
Thank you very much, Florian, and a warm welcome also from my side. We are delighted to have you all with us this afternoon on the second part. As you know, this morning we talked about fashion. Actually, fashion and obviously the packaging industry have a lot in common. Wood-based fibers for fashion and paper are both part of the commodity family of pulp. And in addition to that, in ECE, we have been really collecting market trends for both for decades. Now, we are very curious to see and to hear about the latest developments in the packaging sector. For us, the fashion industry is a bit, or the fashion sector is a bit the extrovert of the two commodities, while paper and cardboard and paperboard are the introverts. Now, also the paper and the cardboard is more difficult to notice. The hardworking community, which literally often receives the hits. As part of the packaging trio, though, together with shipping containers and wooden pallets, it's actually the combination of these three that make global trade go round, that make global trade possible, that also make e-commerce possible, with which we order a lot of fashion brands and fashion items. So two of them are really, really well connected and bring us fashion to our doorsteps, as well as many, many other goods. So we wanted to spotlight this sector today and very much also highlight its sustainability and its role in circular economy. The circular economy is one of the main themes here at UNEC. And I'm very glad that we will hear a lot about this also this afternoon. And actually, I also mentioned it already this morning. We have just released a podcast on the theme, which I very much encourage you to listen to. This is the topic of sustainable production and consumption fits also extremely well with our efforts to reduce the environmental footprint of our society. So highly relevant topic, and I'm very grateful for the many presenters and speakers this afternoon from various backgrounds, including industries, consulting and research. And thanks much for giving us a glimpse into the packaging industry, innovations, novelties, and where this can all take us. A huge thank you also to Ms. Angela Graham-Brown, the director of the Forest Solutions Group from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, for moderating this session. It's a great pleasure to have you here today, Angela. And with this, I'm handing over the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Liliana. It's now my turn to warmly welcome you to this webinar to celebrate the International Day of Forest under the theme of responsible production and consumption of forest products. So this year we're putting the focus on a particular type of forest, which are called sustainable working forest or productive forest. And they represent approximately 30% of all forests, and they come with many benefits. So they provide livelihoods for local communities, habitat for animals, they control water cycles, they help stabilize the climate, but importantly, and often forgotten, they also provide goods and services for everyday's life. So as a way of introduction to the webinar, we wanted to share with you a short video that was developed by the Forest Solutions Group members to describe the life cycle of forest products, starting with the working forest in which they originate.
There are products made of wood all around us, and the demands on the world's forest are increasing every day. Where do these products come from? The journey begins in a forest, but not just any forest. In a sustainable working forest, the land is managed and balanced with its natural surroundings to protect and restore biodiversity and ecosystems. Healthy forests like these provide habitats for local wildlife and purify the water that we drink. Here, trees are regrown year after year and contribute to the livelihoods of local communities. And when trees grow, they naturally remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, giving us the air that we breathe whilst fighting climate change. Sustainable working forests provide the renewable resources for the energy needed to transform the trees into the products we use every day. And here's where it gets interesting. Inside forest products, carbon is stored for the duration of their lifetime, sometimes for hundreds of years. When sourced responsibly, forest products are renewable and they can be recycled several times. Eventually, they turn into bioenergy, which releases carbon dioxide for new trees to absorb and grow, and the cycle continues. The world is changing rapidly, and our planet is in a state of emergency. Renewable and recyclable forest products are part of the solution, and today, through innovation, they're appearing where you would least expect them. Be part of the solution. Choose sustainable forest products.
Okay, so well, this morning, if you were with us, we focused on the use of wood fiber materials in the fashion industry. And this afternoon, we're going to move on to a little bit more of a traditional application of wood fiber with the topic of packaging. So with COVID-19, it has really made its mark on the packaging industry. There's been sharp and surprising shifts in consumer habits during this recent period of time that have led to changes that the packaging industry has had to adapt to. But what we have seen is, as you can imagine, a strong growth for packaging for e-commerce, and it's really put the spotlight on the importance of this paper and paperboard products for e-commerce and the global trade. So we're going to, before we call our first panelist, we wanted to just share a question with you to get a bit of a sense of how important you think parcel deliverers are in your daily life.
So you can find in front of you the poll. So we please kindly invite you to click what you think is the number of parcels that you received last year. And I'll give you another 15 seconds to reply. before we stop the survey, and Angela can take it from there. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I don't see any movements anymore. So now here's the result. It should come. Why doesn't it come here? Let me see. So maybe I read it out because I can't see that it's shared.
Yeah,
You can see them.
Yep.
Okay, sorry. I can see it on my screen, but I couldn't see it in the room scene. Okay, over to you, Angela.
fantastic. It's really give you a sense of how many parcels we're talking about. Okay, so now I would like to invite our first speaker to join us to share some perspective on the innovation that runs in the packaging sector to respond to some of these changing demands of customers. So Auti Marin is the head of sustainable reporting at Smurfit Kappa. And Smurfit Kappa is one of the leading providers of paper-based packaging in the world. So Auti, if you could join us now and share some of your perspectives on the innovation that's going in the forest products sector.
Thank you, Angela. And thank you, UNECE, for inviting and asking for us to give this short pitch and participate to the panel. I first of all have to apologize for my voice. I'm recovering from COVID, so the voice is a little bit suffering from it, but here we go. Smurfit Kappa indeed is a company of about 48,000 people, 10 billion turnover, and with 36 countries and 355 production unit locations globally in Europe and in Latin America. And our business model is integrated, so we work from the forests to recycling, making paper, and finally producing packaging solutions to our customers. And sustainability is obviously something that we take very seriously. I'd like to start by saying and reminding, and I think this came a little bit from Lilian as well, we all need goods, clothes, food, toys for our children, whatnot, and they all need to be somehow delivered to us. That would be packaging that delivers the work. So we need to have a system that makes sure that the products are delivered without damage, without theft. They are stored well. The packaging has proper information about the product, and it is attractive as well. These all play a role when we talk about sustainability as well. In the picture here, I just wanted to show you all kinds of solutions that our industry is making and our company is making. And you can see that in the area of e-commerce, we have also quite a variation of products from, you can see a rollable fashion packaging solution, which is a new innovation from us. This helps the fashion industry actually to ship e-commerce goods to these customers in such a way that they don't need much of ironing after you receive them. It's also very practical, and at the end it is recyclable. The same goes with the flower packaging. It's a system where you can actually send fresh flowers online to your friends, to your mother, whoever needs the flowers from you today. And then there are multiple others, for example, avoiding waste. Top clip system where you only need very little packaging to deliver a 6-pack of beer cans or other cans, to new solutions and innovations of fruit packaging without any kind of plastics on them, or a paper-based child lock system for laundry detergent capsules. So we have all kind of areas where we are working on, and where packaging plays a role. I think where it becomes really important is that we have to make sure that we are delivering packaging that serves those needs that we have given to packaging, but at the same time, it tackles the prejudice that we can face as a packaging. So you want to have it easy to dispose, recyclable, so easily recyclable, which is a benefit for paper because our recycling systems are actually very sophisticated, especially in Europe, but also globally, so that you can easily put away the packaging that you have, you know where to place it, and it can be recycled back to the original fibers. It needs to be fit for purpose, and this is the core of sustainable packaging. When packaging has been designed, thinking about the objective of the content of the packaging, thinking about the logistical chains, thinking about marketplace, you are achieving something where the product is delivering with the optimal packaging materials around it, the contents in a good shape to the consumer. But at the same time, it is attractive enough so that when the consumer receives his or her product, or is in a shop and going through the shelves, chooses that one that appeals to them, we ensure that the products are actually bought and taken into consumption. According to FAO, about 3 to 5% of the packaging, sorry, now I'm mixing percentages. According to a study by Inkpen, only 3 to 5% of the carbon footprint of a value chain of a packaged good comes from packaging itself. At the same time, it protects the rest of the 95% of the content. So it plays a huge role. At the same time, if it's not attractive and if it's not being sold, it will never go into consumption, and that leads also to landfill, which we don't want. So even though packaging is kind of a funny little dilemma of being invisible, it plays a very visible and big role in this all. We also know that when we have proper packaging fit for purpose, the damage to the produce improves significantly. And that's the FAO study, which shows that, for example, for food goods, packaging plays the role in making sure that we actually get the foods from the producers in good shape to the consumers. What I actually would like to end my short pitch with is to say that for fit for purpose, we can look at the typical waste hierarchy to think about how we design it. So first of all, at Smurfit Kappa, for example, we look at, do we need it? So that's the refuse part. Can we reuse something? There are elements, for example, our fibers are constantly reused. How do we recycle? That is a significant element of packaging design now, especially for e-commerce, where you want it to be very simple. So we are focusing on monomaterial solutions, where you can see actually on the bottom row of my pictures, all of them are plastic or other material free. It's one single material which can be easily placed into the paper recycling, which helps consumers to actually do their part of the circular economy. At the end, we can recover energy from the product and return it back to the nature. And our material is renewable, which plays, of course, a role in the circular economy as well, bringing it into the new dimension of bioeconomy as well. With this, I think that was 5 minutes. I am open for questions and looking forward to the discussion further on.
Thank you, Alti. Do we have any questions from the chat?
Chat. No, at the moment not, but
Okay. So of course I have some questions for you. So we've talked a lot about the recyclability of the product. But you have the advantage of having a product that can have a pretty high ratio of recycled fiber as part of its component. Can you tell us a little bit more about the combination of virgin and recycled fiber and why that is important?
There are different elements into this. So first of all, we have, and I keep on going back to the fit for purpose. So recycled fibers play, of course, a huge importance in the whole circular economy, and using them, it means that we are also using the raw material in a sustainable way and as thoroughly as we can. At the same time, we do need virgin fibers, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that we have such applications where we need high safety, product safety from the packaging. And in that case, because we can't tell exactly what is in the recycled fiber after it has been printed and it has traveled the world, virgin fibers offer you a safer option. For example, food safety is one of those things where it might become necessary. Another area is functionality in certain conditions, humidity, being frozen. Those are good examples where we expect the paper to behave in a certain way, and virgin fibers might actually give you a good alternative there. And then lastly, this is a renewable product. This is an organic product, so it doesn't live forever. And I don't think any of our raw materials actually does that. So we need a little flux of virgin fibers into the system constantly to keep the circular economy alive. At the same time, it doesn't mean that this is not a closed loop. I believe that it's a closed loop because we have the circularity from the nature at the same time, and it was very beautifully presented in the video that we saw.
Thank you, Elke. We now have a question through the chat.
So Jeremy asked us a question to Oti. More or less first as a statement, the COVID crisis has seen a huge use of plastic and its waste. And then the question is, can paper capture market share in the next crisis? And I think I would also add on top of that, what was the experience from your company if you have knowledge about what happened during COVID? I mean, there must be a impact from that kind of people staying home and different consumption patterns. Maybe you can enlighten us a little bit about this.
Oh, sorry. Yes, actually, yes, I understand that plastic packaging had a lot of demand, and it had certain hygiene and safety questions coming into the picture as well. However, paper packaging wasn't doing bad either. All packaging was needed, so the crisis was actually requiring packaging. E-commerce, when we were forced to stay at home and shops couldn't work, normally we started to order things at home, and this has been a huge expansion in e-commerce, which we could also see in during the crisis. The other thing is that the crisis emphasized the need of moving goods around. And I think that packaging, it was deemed as an essential product. So for example, in those cases where you would need to decide whether people should be working or not in a factory, ours were allowed to work. So there was a quite big demand, and we were responding to it. I think that the question about market share and capturing it, that's going to be an interesting one. I would like to say that, and especially to Jeremy, that the EU needs to take care of as well the future legislation in that way that we have a healthy innovation going on, where any packaging material, regardless if it's paper or plastics, has a fair level playing field to innovate, and we are not going to be limited by unnecessary rulings around this. That's the way how we can see maybe moves into more, or not maybe, definitely moves into more sustainable packaging choices. And I believe those are, of course, within the wood-based solutions and paper-based solutions globally, where we can actually expand the market share.
Super. Thank you very much, Outi. Please stay with us for a little bit longer until the end of this this panel. We'll have some more questions for you. And for all those listening to us, please continue to pop questions in the chat as we go through this this session. Okay, so now we would like to test your awareness of how much paper and paperboard you consume on a daily basis with an extra poll.
Okay, thank you, Angela. So the next poll is up. It is asking about what is happening regarding paperboard and paper consumption in the EC region in kilogram per capita per year for packaging. So we've looked a little bit at our statistics that we collect every year, and we hand them also over to the FAO in Rome so that you can also verify that in the global statistics. And we also looked at the database from our UNEC colleagues about the population. So I see that the results are still moving a little bit. I give you 10 more seconds to choose. And I think now we're coming to the end. Nothing is moving anymore. So I close the survey and I share the results, and you have it in front of you. I quickly summarize before I hand it back to you, Angela. So people believe that it's 25 kilograms per year and per person. That's only 4%. Then there's a group of 16% who thinks it's 100 kilograms per year. And then there's 40-40 between those who think 50 or 75 kilograms. Actually, we did our math, and based on the information that we have in our databases, it's about 78.3 kilograms in 2020. So the 75 kilogram per person per year would be the closest, just to give you a ballpark figure for packaging. So that is including obviously industrial packaging and household packaging, but it gives you a kind of idea of how much paper our society generates for packaging every year. Let me quickly just do a quick screenshot here.
Okay, so we're going to stay on the topic of paper and paperboard and call our specialist, who is joining us in the very early hours of the day from Vancouver. So the next speaker is Michel Valois, who is the president and CEO of Valois Vision Marketing, a provider of strategic market intelligence. Michel, if you can join us, and please share your presentation of a few insights on market trends in this space. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Michel Valois. I'm President and CEO of Valois Vision Marketing in Vancouver. I have been asked by the UNECE to give a quick presentation on the global production of pulp, paper, and paperboard. And what's important to notice is just how big this whole sector is in our daily lives. Give you an idea in the next slide of the global production. It has reached about 400 million tons in 2020 for paper and paperboard, whereas for pulp, it's just under 200 million tons. To the naked eye, it looks like it would be flat, but we've seen in 2008 during the financial crisis, and of late, in part due to the pandemic, but also because of restructuring in the industry, that there's been slight declines. I'll give you a regional breakdown into the next slide. In Asia, where there's a lot of increased standards of living, we see that the industry for paper and paperboard has been growing in terms of production, whereas in North America, it is about 75 million tons, And in Europe, it's just about 100 million tons. And there seems to be, or appears to be, a slight decline in 2020 in the Western markets. And we can see in Europe and North America that in 2008, there was that dip. In the next slide, we can give you some trends that have been driving the industry in the last 10, 20, or even 25 years. And for paper and paperboard for packaging, it's very important to notice that there's a trend to replace plastics, including styrofoam, in the world. And a lot of the fast food industry is driving some of this. And the potential growth is approaching $5 billion US per year. That is very significant. In terms of container board growth, it's about 5 to 7% per year, which is extremely healthy. The container board market is segmented into various major categories, of which 45% is just in the food industry. So processed foods, beverage, protein, that's all your meats, and fresh produce. So the rest would be your non-durables, your e-commerce, shipping and distribution, and durable goods. So packaging has a lot of potential and is growing every year. Graphic papers, which is essentially your newsprint and your printing and writing papers, those have been in decline. There's been a huge swing from paper-based advertising and communication to electronic formats. And the pandemic has certainly been pushing that forward as people stay at home and communicate by video and through the internet, through chats and email. In the 1995 to 2022 period, projected out to the end of this year, some 75 million tons of graphic paper capacity has been converted or closed. And the conversions have been to paperboard primarily. In the 2020 to 22 period, 21 million tons have been converted or will have been closed. So that's significant in that just the last 3 years, or the 3-year period, it's almost a third of where we are looking at for the past 27 years. The shortages and high prices that we're seeing right now are directly related to the pandemic and the closures of capacity. And some of those closures were due to non-profitability or older machines that couldn't compete with more efficient or larger machines. So the shortages and high prices today, we're seeing that there's some demand destruction. People are unable to get paper or unable to afford the paper, and that has forced them to go even faster towards electronic medium. One area which I think is very important for people to understand, because some of those in the audience, whether they know it or not, are probably using or wearing products that are made from dissolving pulp. The dissolving pulp industry is growing, and it consists of two main areas: one commodity, which is viscose, and one specialty, which is acetates. In the viscose area, we have roughly 5.3 million tons of annual demand. Those viscose markets are primarily in Asia, 576 million US dollars, and the following in Europe and North America and the rest of the world add up to about $1.5 billion. So it's a huge industry, a huge market. For the viscose apparel segments, you can see that the annual growth is significant for dresses. Yeah, a lot of women, wearing dresses today might think, well, I thought my dress was made from other products than dissolving pulp. Casual wear, sportswear for breathability and no need for ironing. they're growing at about 15% per year. Shirts, even your bedding made from bamboo, which may be produced in Asia from dissolving pulp, those are growing at 2%. Towels, 20%. So it's interesting and very important to understand what's driving the industry today and how much paper, paperboard, and the higher end dissolving pulps are part of our daily lives. So that's the basic end of the presentation. If there are any questions, I'm open to any of them at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Valois. Please pop your questions in the chat. Surely that must have triggered some questions. But in the meantime, would you be able to tell us a bit more about how the shift, so we can see that paper and newsprint have a quite gloomy future, it does seem. So how difficult is it to shift the production to cardboard and paper for packaging? What are the hurdles there?
The hurdles are a question of, first of all, adapting your machine to be able to produce the packaging. Often you need different fibers, and you need to slow your machine down, or you need to make sure that you're producing a paper with a proper technical characteristics. And the actual end user is very different. You're not running cardboard through a printer, and you're not using a newsprint machine to print packaging papers. So it's very important to understand where the fibers are coming from, how they're processed, and who the end user are. So the challenge is, how can you also change your source of distribution for the recovered papers or collection systems for collecting the recovered papers in order to feed your packaging paper machine now. And some of the reduction in production that we have seen is the time needed, or the downtime needed, in order to convert the paper machine, which would normally be producing graphic papers, over to paperboard. So there's a period where the machine is not working, and it takes some tweaking and investment. So it's not a flip the switch and turn the paper machine from one paper grade to another in a matter of minutes or hours. It takes sometimes several months.
Michelle, can I just follow up on this very interesting explanation? I mean, you said, I mean, there was the impressive figures about how many closures there were. Now, I assume that those companies who are still in the market are having huge margins because there's such a kind of imbalance between demand and supply. Doesn't this also trigger again that people stay in the business of packaging for those who already stay in packaging? And also my question is then, on top of that, how about the margins in the dissolving grades? Is it attractive? Is it more attractive than compared to packaging and pulp and paper?
Well, both markets are very, very different. There's a lot of innovation, and there's a lot of global trade going on for driving the need for packaging. But what's happening in dissolving is that the innovation is still very much at the forefront of the industry, and then talking about the fashion industry. So there are many new applications, lots of investment in producing clothing made from dissolving pulps. And dissolving pulps don't just limit yourself to the fashion industry. When you're talking about the specialty areas of acetates, you have applications in the food industry as thickening agents, or in the personal care industry for cosmetics, in the pharmaceutical industry for pill coatings, in the construction industry or automotive industry for brake pads. So there are a lot of different applications, and the margins are very healthy.
Thank you. And I just follow up with another question on dissolving pulp for apparel, which was posed by Ben Gunneberg. Owen, I will come back to your question in a minute, but let's first go in logical order because it's a nice stream. What are the predictions for growth of dissolving pulps for apparel? And that's the question.
Well, in one of the slides that I presented presented, the growth in apparel is positive in pretty much all areas. The largest being dresses for women, but it's very much a growth area for casual wear and shirts. Your cotton t-shirt provides you with certain aspects that dissolving pulp based t-shirt gives you even better wearability and breathability, especially if you're doing sports. Cotton shirt will absorb the moisture and will cling to your body, whereas dissolving pulp based shirts or casual wear would not tend to cling to your body as much. They breathe a lot better. So there are certainly some applications and growth areas that are very attractive for not only those that are producing the fabric, the rayon, but producing the actual product, the shirts and the other apparel that people wear on a daily basis.
Thank you, Michelle. Let me bring you back to our topic of packaging. The question that Owen asked, and which is also a nice segue then to our next segment. What percentage of fiber used for packaging is from recycled fiber? Do you have any, I mean, even if it is a sub-regional share or some experience from North America, or maybe you have some figures from Europe. So what is the share of fibers that are recycled going into packaging?
The packaging area is very different depending on whether or not you're talking about North America or Europe. In Europe, where the legislation is much stricter or much more enforced than in other markets, you have up to 70, I believe, 72% of material that is recycled. And so therefore, there's a lot more available to domestic producers, and there's a certain amount that is exported primarily to Asia. But the recycled content can vary depending on the product and the market, anywhere from 30 to 50%. And some products are even 100% recycled, but those are very limited in application because, as a previous speaker brought up, you need to have safety or strength or certain characteristics in your product to protect the contents.
Thank you very much. Please stay with us until the end of the session. And we're going to stay on the topic of recyclability. We'll start with a poll question and then invite our next speaker to join us.
So the question we've prepared for you is a perfect lead over from Michelle's last point on the recyclability and the share. So this time we're asking, up to how many times do you think paper can be recycled? Here we're talking about paper, mainly for paper board, but we will see in our next speaker about the very specific details of that. What do you think? How many times? The options are 3 times, 7 times, 15 times, 25 times, or even more. So I see some movements and I see a clear leader. I give you another 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I close it. And I will share with you the results. And it is very clear that was before I came across a study that we will hear afterwards, was my understanding as well, 7 times. That is the ballpark figure we have in Europe, and about recyclability of paper. So with that result, with a very clear dominating figure and indication, I hand it back to you, Angela.
Thank you. That was also the figure I had in my head, sorry. Until I met the next speaker, who's René Eckart, who's a senior scientist from the Grasse University of Technology. So please, René, please join us and tell us how often can one recycle carton board?
Well, hello, thank you for the introduction, and also thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this study we did. Well, these 7 times, that's the number the paper maker has in mind when you talk about recycling of paper. And I learned this figure as well in my lectures at the university back in the day. So it's not surprising that this is the figure that pops up. if you look into the literature, that's also a figure that is often used. Although there were already some studies in the past where they went for 12 cycles, for example. And 3 years ago, a group in Darmstadt in Germany, they did a study on linerboard, on a linerboard sample, and they did 25 cycles of recycling and looked into the properties and what's happening to the paper. And we kind of picked this up and did our own study, and we did it on carton board, on a folding box board sample. So we started out with folding box board from an industrial production, which was already produced mainly based on recycled fiber. So it's 80% recycled fiber and around 20% refined mechanical pulp in this sample we started out with. And it's not even recycled material of high quality. It's a rather low quality recycling material. And yeah, what we did was go into the lab and re-slash the paper and form lab sheets again. And we did this 25 times. And one of the major issues when you think about doing this is retention. So when you think about production of a sheet of paper, you use a certain mesh and then you form your sheet, and the fine material of the stock tends to go through the mesh, so you're not retaining everything on top. So it's when you think about the lab, an issue of keeping everything within the cycle. So we came to a setup that allowed us to recycle 99% of the material within one cycle. So we lost about 1% of the fiber material at every cycle. So there was some losses we couldn't avoid. And what we did along these 25 cycles was look into pulp properties, mainly into the swelling potential of the fiber material and also the fiber length distribution. So how the fibers change, are they getting shorter? Is there fine material produced over these reslashing cycles? And also the swelling, because we do know that starting out from the virgin fiber material, we have an effect that's called hornification with drying. So the fibers tend to get a little more brittle with every drying cycle. But this kind of happens very much in the first 1, 2, 3 cycles, and then the effect degrades. And after 5 cycles, there is not much effect anymore when it comes to swelling. So then the fibers, they tend to become really stable when it comes to the swelling potential. There's not much change anymore. And we also did look at mechanical properties of the paper sheets. We looked into the bending stiffness, because this is especially interesting to folding boxboard, and also in tensile strength, so in the shear strength of the sheet. And we got a pretty surprising result, actually, because for bending stiffness, there was no change at all over these 25 cycles. And for the tensile strength, we get a slight increase even in the beginning, and then it got stable. This is kind of intriguing, and I can explain why this happened. It happened because during the reslashing, we produced some fine material. So the mechanical impact of reslashing, it kind of peeled off parts of the fiber walls, and we produced fine material. And this fine material tends to allow higher bonding area. So there is a better bonding between the fibers. And this is why we increase the strength a little bit even in the beginning, and then it remains stable. So it's a kind of, it's 2 overlaying effects, actually. It's that there probably was some decrease in mechanical properties, and there was the increase due to the mechanical impact of reslashing. And you can hardly separate this. So yeah, bottom line, over these 25 cycles, we did not see any decrease in mechanical properties. What can we conclude from that? Well, on the one hand, obviously the fiber material has the potential to be recycled 25 times. There is no denying that. On the other hand, we already see, even in this lab setup with very little mechanical impact, that we produce some fine material. So you're going to change your material to some extent during the reslashing. And if you think about the industrial process, also the cleaning steps that are necessary to get rid of the debris, maybe a homogenization step when you think about graphic applications where you try to homogenize any dirt spots and stuff like that. And maybe there is even a step where you try to improve the properties. So you put in mechanical energy and you produce maybe fine material, maybe even shorten your fibers a little bit. But there is no need for a given fiber that is there, partially intact, that it can't be recycled 25 times and even more. So that's the kind of takeaway. So I'm not saying you can recycle cardboard 25 times. I'm saying that the fibers, they allow to be recycled 25 times as long as they are kept intact. That's kind of the point, I would say. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to tell you today.
Thank you. How were the results of your study received by your audience and by forest product companies particularly?
Yeah, well, it was published in a German journal, actually, in the same journal the group of Darmstadt published their work, and there was a lot of response from industry and from different groups to this work. Much more response than I have ever gotten to any stuff that I did in research in the past. So it's obviously an interesting topic, and it presses kind of a button, put it that way.
I have one technical question from the chat that is asking, giving increase in bending and tensile strength, were there changes in porosity, e.g. for leakage? That is coming from Jeremy.
Well, we didn't look into porosity in this case. I would expect it. And if you go into that detail in terms of technical question, I have to mention something. When we started out with this study, we didn't use the sample as it is, because there is a lot of pigments in there as well, so small particles, and these are really hard to recycle. So what we did is we took out most of the fine material in the very beginning, and we started out only with the fibers. This makes it easier to do the recycling without losing anything, and it doesn't compromise your message because the fiber material is used. So we started at a rather low Schopper-Riegler value, and the Schopper-Riegler value is the dewatering. So this changes when fine material is produced, and this Schopper-Riegler value is increased due to the fine material, and this for sure will also increase the or decrease the porosity. So it's definitely there. We didn't look into it specifically, so I have no figures for that.
Okay, thank you very much. I have another question from Paula Martirez from Stera Enso, who's asking how many times do you think virgin fibers can be recycled? I guess that's a kind of overall question.
Well, in our study, we didn't see an end after 25 cycles. And as I said, we started out with recycled material already. So yeah, more than that, much more than that, possibly. As I tried to mention it, it's a matter of how good are you in preserving your fibers through all these recycling steps, through the processing of these fibers. So this is going to be limiting. The potential to do this very often is there. It's a matter of collection rate and how you treat the fiber in stock preparation, how much you're going to change that. So the virgin fiber, it starts a little bit earlier. When it comes to the properties, if you start out with virgin fibers, this will look differently. So we had this case that we didn't lose much in the beginning. We even increased it a little bit. If you start with virgin fibers, this effect of hornification will be much stronger. So you're going to lose properties in the beginning, and then you're kind of leveling out at some point. That's what I would expect.
Thank you. I have another question, if I may. So Angela's nodding. There's another question from Maila Pulama. Based on your result, would it be possible to assume reduced need for virgin fiber? And that is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to have you really on our discussion here, because it is changing a lot if we have this figure applied and if we work against it is a theoretical value, but if we really think about the potential, then the question is, do you think that there's, a reduced need for virgin fiber?
Yeah, well, this was kind of already touched before before by Uti as well as by Michelle, I think, when you talk about products and properties. And if you think about certain properties of products, for example, if you think about sack kraft paper for cement bags, you need a paper that is really, really strong and still has high porosity. You're not going to produce this from recycled fiber. That's not possible. You don't get the properties. And it's similar for graphic applications if you think about very high brightness and properties. So for certain properties, you will need maybe 100% virgin fibers, maybe a certain part of virgin fibers. You're not going to be able to produce this product from recycled fiber only. And that's a matter of properties. Uti mentioned the safety issue when you think about food packaging, and therefore we need to use virgin fibers. So I think it's suitable for a lot of products in packaging, but there will be products where you will always need virgin fibers, and you're not going to be able to produce these products with virgin fibers. But maybe if you think about the growth in packaging, and there are a lot of products that may be produced by recycled fiber, maybe one could assume that it's not necessary to put more virgin fiber into the system to produce these packaging products that can in part or maybe fully be produced by recycling fibers.
Thank you, René, for covering the topic so well. We'd like to give the opportunity to our panelists now to join us, rejoin us. So we have Auti and Michel Valois. If you could put your videos back on. We now have a few minutes where we know the floor is open for questions. So please do pop them in the chat on anything that you would have heard up to now, where you might still have questions. You should just feel free to put them there and we'll ask them to the panelists. But in the meantime, I'd like to get Auti and Michel's reaction to this study. We'll start with you, Auti, because you really working for a forest company and good knowledge of the limitations and practical implications of a study like this. In your view, for this theoretical 25 times to become a reality, what changes do we need to see in the enabling environment? Think of, for example, waste collection infrastructure, policies, consumers. Where does the biggest change need to happen for this to become a reality in the future?
Yeah, I think, Angela, was it actually with you that we were working? No, it wasn't, but we've been working on multiple different projects where we are looking at the paper packaging life cycles or paper life cycles. And obviously we have certain areas where we need to work together with the whole value chain, all of our customers, but also suppliers, to be able to confirm that the contamination in recycled fibers is not there. And I think that's a responsibility for everybody, because those decisions come from different places and they have to be also, the solutions have to be available. So as a paper industry that recycles, we are not the only one who can do that alone. The other thing is that, and I think, Angela, this is most likely the most important one, we do still need to work on the recycling infrastructure all over the place. We have very different infrastructures, even within this little part of the world, which is called the UNECE. And this is the leader in recycling of paper. So we have, as far as no harmonized systems within the EU alone, we have the US, we have Russia, and all the other countries in there. So the systems are different, and that leads into different qualities in the recycling loop. And I think then, of course, there is still quite a lot of education that we can do with the consumer. I live in Amsterdam at the moment, and I am a Finn, and have lived also in Switzerland and Germany. So you can see very different behaviors as well, how well people actually are studying and learning to recycle. And I think that should be, of course, a kind of a citizen's pride issue, that you know what to do and you recycle. So those are elements that we need to work with. Maybe I would start with the infrastructures and keep them still going into a better one. That would be my view.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's a very thorough response. We now have a question that came through the chat, and I think I'll direct this one to you, Michelle.
No, the chat is for the panel.
Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
No, the question from the chat is again from Jeremy, and it is about the role that households can play. I mean, it is going in the direction that Oti outlined, can play in improving quality and quantity of paper and paperboard to be recycled. I think the question goes in the direction, which ones are the most important steps to improve this, what Oti just mentioned, the recycling network, recycling behavior. What are the biggest improvements that can be done easily by, let's say, by the end user? I think it's for all the panelists again, but we can start with Michelle if you want.
Yes, if you go back to the 1980s or 1990s, a lot of the blue box programs were instituted here in North America, and I believe that Europe was ahead of North America. And lately, maybe the last few years, it has been growing in Asia, in part because of the banning of imported fibers into countries like China, which at one point reached almost 30 million tons, which is huge. And a lot of that product came from Europe and North America. And back in the 90s, you had a lot of legislation being passed by municipalities, by cities, to make sure that the paper was collected. And the system was not efficient, and it made it very expensive for the industry to collect the fiber. So if you want to make sure that you increase household participation, you have to make sure that the people first have the collection systems in place. That means the boxes, they have the trucks to come and pick it up, or they have places where the individual households can drop off the material. And then it has to be collected and then processed. So there's a long processing and chain that has to be put in place and made efficient in order for that fiber to make it to the paper mill in the form and in the cleanliness that it needs or requires in order to produce the packaging, which is going to be specific to the end use that it's intended. So there's a lot of properties, characteristics, processes that have to be put into place. And it's not simple, it's not cheap, it's very expensive, and there are a lot of participants and a lot of players. So it's a question of getting everybody in the same direction or rowing in the same direction and understanding that the material is there. If it's collected, it can be used, but if it's not collected, it will not be used.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Also, I mean, Renee, you must have worked also on all the aspects of recycling and the kind of impurities. What do you think could be the best measure to come closer to this 25 times in reality? If you think about what could be the role of the end consumer in this kind of recycling chain?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I'm not so much an expert in these cycles and life cycle analysis and stuff. So we didn't look into that much. I'm more an expert on the fiber level and on the pulp level. Still, in Austria, we do collect a lot of paper and in every household, so that the system is there in Austria. What I would think is that even if you have a collection system for every household, this is going to be a very diverse material that is going to be collected. So it's not going to be suitable for products that need higher quality or higher product quality. You're going to be able to use that in products of lower quality, maybe folding boxboard that is not supposed to go into food packaging or stuff like that. Other than that, I would think that the cleaner the material is and the easier it is to be reslashed and cleaned, the better that would be to the fiber material, because the more energy you need to put into the fiber material during the processing, the more you're going to be mechanically reducing the integrity of the fiber. And in the end, it's going to be a lot of fine particles that are not going to be very usable anymore. So the less impact is necessary during recycling, the better. And this is a matter of how clean is it at the very beginning and how are you treating it in your process. That's kind of my opinion. But as I said, I'm not so much an expert on that topic.
Okay, thank you. I think we've heard from different stories and different experiences on the recycling. And we also have the waste catalog that we're working on in Geneva. So this, I mean, this comment about that there's no standardized system about classifying recycling paperboard and paper is very interesting. And we will look into that also from our end, if that's already included. I have one last question, which is a very let's say basic question, but I think it's one of the key questions also. How sustainable is recycling of paperboard? So this came to the channel directly to me. So how sustainable is the recycling compared to fresh fiber paperboards from the chemical footprint and from the energy footprint? I don't know if any one of you has an answer to that. I'm floating that, I think, to the three of you, and maybe you can open your microphone and say something if you have an answer on that. Oti, I think the first one is you.
Yeah, I think that this is a very, very typical question. And I would say that there is no real difference. And the reason why I'm saying this is that this all goes back, especially in the case of packaging, this all goes back to the fact of fit for purpose. It is not only about production of paper, it is the production of the whole packaging, and it is the whole packaging value chain until the recycling and end of life. So that's why, even though there are different needs in the pulping and repulping and in the processing of that, collection of recycled fibers, etc., we have still the question of how do you deliver the product inside the package through someone, through a supply chain to somebody. And that is the question that you should need to answer. And then you need to optimize by choosing the right fibers.
Thank you, Oti. Michelle or René, you want to add on to that? I think that was a very good answer. It really helped a lot. Thank you very much. So I think with that, I give it back to you, Angela, and we're coming now to the next panel.
Actually, I see, Michelle, you have your hand up. Did you want to jump in on that one?
Yes, I just wanted to add to Oti's comments, and where the fiber comes from. If it's a virgin fiber, it has to be coming from a forest or a plantation, virgin forest or a plantation. And so the tree has to be cut down, it has to be processed, it has to be brought to a sawmill or to a lumber mill and processed, and then the fiber chipped and then turned into pulp. If it's a recycled product, the product has to be collected from the household, it has to, or the office, it has to be transported to a sorting facility, it has to be sorted, then it has to be shipped to a paper mill and then used there. So either way, the fiber has to make it to the paper mill where it's going to be turned into paper or paperboard. And so there is a certain amount of energy, a certain process that has to be expended or followed in order to get that fiber to the mill. So yes, there is cost either way.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thanks to our three panelists for everything you've shared with us today. You can stay with us for the rest of the session. talking about packaging, it's pretty much impossible not to talk about plastic. And so we're going to move on now to a second section of this webinar, where we'll talk about how we can phase out plastic. What are the different solutions that exist? The problem of plastic pollution has caught headlines, especially recently, but also has made some good headway with in the policy arena with the UNEAA resolution, which has started the process of the development of a plastic pollution treaty by 2024, which is a very promising development, and we'll see more and more alternatives hitting the market due to this. So we'll start first with a poll, as with the other sections, and then we'll dive into the subject.
I see. It's about, okay, I call it result for now, and I will share the results with you. And let me see, now you should be able to see. Let me see, I think increase that on your screen. So partially, the majority in the room, so 2/3 of the group attending our meeting, says that paper can partially replace the plastic, and we should use we should limit the use of organic plastic to the extent possible. So that is a big group, and let's see what our next speaker will have to say about that.
Thank you. So now I'd like to invite our next speaker, who is a scientist who has been working on this topic for many years. Alicia Monteos Cardenas is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of College Cork. And she will tell us a bit more about the potential for paper and plant-based plastic to substitute for fossil-based alternatives for single-use plastic. So Alicia, please, the floor is yours. You can take the microphone.
Hi, hello, good afternoon. I think I have a presentation. Thank you, yeah. So my name is Alicia Mateos Cardenas. Today I'm going to present about bioplastics. So I am a plastic pollution researcher, and I have a PhD in environmental science. My expertise is mostly in microplastics, but I recently started a project on bioplastics that I'm going to present today as well. Please, next slide. Thank you. So I'm actually very happy to be here today. I've learned loads about paper, so I thought I would show you a little bit of a plastic context as well. So if you look at the graph on the left, you see the global plastic production from the 50s until 2020. You can see that it obviously had an exponential increase. And just giving from my own perspective, I was born in 1990. So if you look at the graph 1990 until 2020, there was actually a 3.5 times increase in plastic production. And you can also obviously guess that the pollution has a similar trend as well. Regarding European demand, and I believe this is similar in other continents as well, more than 40%, 40.5% of the demand is on packaging. And this also means mostly single-use plastics that I will mention in a minute. Other demand is on building and construction, cars, electronics. And before I continue, I also want to say that we believe that plastics are not good or bad, it's how we use them. But so obviously the use of plastics for cars or construction or even medicine is a good application. The problem comes with single-use plastics. Please, next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so the benefits of petroleum-based plastics. So obviously they are lightweight, which helps them being transported up across continents. They're low cost to be produced, which is good for the industry, and they are convenient, which is good for us. So all of us sometimes have forgotten to bring a plastic bag to the grocery or a plastic bottle, and literally we can buy a plastic bottle, drink the water and throw it away. But in the next slide, the main problems with petroleum-based plastics. Obviously, packaging, it means single-use plastics. They are used for, I think they were saying like 12 minutes or like minutes or hours, maybe days, and then throw away, and they will last in the environment longer than the time that we use them. This is because we are in a linear economy. So once the plastic is a product, we use them, it becomes waste, and then it has no value. And then other problems are obviously microplastics. We have all heard of them, nanoplastics as well. And also plastics have some additives. Some of them are known, others are actually unknown. They are created all the time by industries, which sometimes they are not properly tested for toxicity. And there is also the whole social injustice thing about plastics as well. So in my next slide, the current solutions to petroleum-based plastics. And I say current because I've been working on plastic pollution since 2014, and I've seen different solutions along the time. So the most important one, very recent one, a couple of weeks ago in the UN in Nairobi meeting, they agreed on an international legally binding treaty to end plastic pollution, which is great. And then for the next 2 years, we will see different meetings and what the treaty becomes. Then other solutions that we all have heard of, reuse, reduce, refuse, and recycle, and they should be in this order, meaning that recycling of plastic should always be the last step that we follow. Then circular economy. So contrary to a linear economy, in a circular economy, plastics are never become waste. They always enter back the loop, which this doesn't really happen at the moment. And then lastly, plastics that come from renewable sources, which are also biodegradable and compostable. So in my next slide now, I'm going to be focused on bioplastics. But before that, I want to kind of explain the definition between both of them. So I've been saying petroleum-based plastics. So that's the kind of like the normal plastic that we think of when we think of a plastic. So these plastics are non-biodegradable and they are petroleum-based. Whereas plant-based plastics are obviously plant-based, but also they should also be biodegradable or compostable. Please, if you could click in this animation, and then another one. So the thing is, and I will show this in a minute, some plant-based plastics are not really biodegradable. That's the problem. So a true bioplastic should be both. So in my next slide, I'll show you an example. Last year in 2021, in the European Union introduced this label. If you could just please click. So there's now a new label that says plastic in product. And it can be very confusing for consumers and even me at the beginning, because then you see this cup is compostable, but then you also see plastic in product. So how can this be possible? The thing is, most probably these kind of cups are made of a bioplastic. And that's why it says plastic in product. But then if you could please click again, I found this photo from a researcher from Canada. And basically they put a normal petroleum-based plastic tea bag in a bin. And then after some time, the cellulosic or cardboard paper obviously had degraded, but the plastic still remained. So I wonder if we will see this happening with bioplastics as well that are supposed to be compostable. So next, I'm going to present my tea bag case study. So last year, or at the end of 2020, Lion's Tea, which is one of the major Irish brands for teas and tea bags in Ireland, commissioned a study with me in the lab. So I tested 8 different brands of teas that come in tea bags that are sold in Ireland, but also in mainland Europe, and I suppose in other countries as well. And I tested by putting the tea bags in those grids that you can see in a garden. So this means that the study was done under real environmental conditions. We made a video for social media, so if you scan the QR code, you can see more about how this was made. So in the next slide, the findings that we found. So like I said, I tested 8 different brands, but it was mainly 3 different types of tea bags. So one is made of polypropylene, which is a petroleum-based plastic, and paper. Another 2 brands, one of them, which Lions, was made of PLA, which is a bioplastic and paper, and then another one was 100% PLA. So what happened? I tested the tea bags from a couple of weeks up to 12 months, which is a long time for a scientific study. So the tea bags that were made with polypropylene and paper, I found that after 12 months, you could still find tea bags in the soil. The cellulose material had completely degraded. So what you see there in the first photo on the left was basically the polypropylene layer. The 2 brands that had PLA and paper in the center, they completely degraded before 3.5 months in the soil. And what's very interesting to end this study is that the tea bags that were made of 100% PLA, so 100% bioplastic, were still in the soil after 12 months, and they were actually almost intact. They didn't even get brittle. So just to end my presentation, in the next slide, basically the conclusion is, as you can see, not all bioplastics perform the same in the environment. This is also a very new area of study, so new materials are literally being developed every day. So we need to focus on better alternatives, which include how we use plastics as a consumers, or rather we don't use them as a consumers, but I think we'll probably talk about it in a minute. So yeah, thank you very much. Look forward to see if there's any questions. And happy International Forest Day.
Thank you, Alicia. We have a question that came through the chat. Did you want to?
I didn't see because I was previewing.
Okay. So Jeremy is asking if it's helpful to encourage composting, given its overall CO2 and or CH4 implications. Is it still helpful to encourage composting?
Well, I suppose it depends whether it's like in a public setting or industrial setting. So for example, here in Ireland, a lot of people do like very small, super small scale compost in their gardens. Basically, they are just composting the food scraps and then using them in the garden. Then there is the industrial composting facilities as well. I suppose I'm not sure about the emissions. I should probably look it up. But I mean, it doesn't have to be the main solution. It can just be a part of an overall solution in this problem.
Okay, Alicia, I have a question which is also on my mind for a long time, and I wanted to ask it to you because I think you're the most, the best informed expert I know. The question is, when you look at your study and the biodegradable plastic has gone after this 1 year, what happens to the bioplastic? Does the smaller components of these stay in the microorganisms in the soil? Did you look at that, or maybe you read about what is happening to the components of the bioplastic, which then has disappeared? It has gone somewhere, and what I read somewhere with my limited knowledge as a forester is that bioplastic degrades faster to smaller components, but still ends up in the food chain somehow. Do you have any information on that, or can it just be, is it absorbed as cellulose and just digested?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in the case of one of the tea bag cases, so basically most tea bags are made of blends. So the one that had paper and a PLA, so bioplastic, the concentration of PLA is very small. So we believe that that's why it degraded very fast. So what happens there, and obviously I haven't tested this, is that the PLA just becomes, back to carbon and then degrades into the soil. It's true that some studies are finding PLA or bioplastic microplastics in the environment. And that also shows how the other tea bag, for example, didn't degrade at all. Perhaps in a longer time, it would actually start to fragment, as it seems that it's just acting as a petroleum-based plastic. So yeah, in like microplastics can be made from any polymer. And in that case, they act kind of similarly to each other. Obviously depends on the densities and also additives. So PLA plastics could probably have different additives that could potentially be toxic as well as petroleum-based plastics. This is very new and there are not many studies at the moment, but I believe there are groups that are studying this to answer these questions.
Okay, so we're waiting for a question, I think, from Christian to come through the chat. But in the meantime, let me ask you, so what would need to change for paper and plant-based plastics to become a more sustainable and broadly used alternative to petroleum-based plastics, in your view?
Well, the most important one, and that I think everyone needs to be aware, is that you know, during the previous sessions, other speakers were talking about how paper or paperboard can be recycled so many times. Plastics cannot be recycled that many times, or if they do, they are recycled into something of lower value. So it's also very important that as we see bioplastics being introduced in the markets, we make sure that as long as, I mean, as much as we can as consumers as well, or if someone is an expert, we try to understand if those bioplastics are really biodegradable. So some bioplastics can be biodegradable or compostable only in industrial settings because they need very high concentrations and pressure to be fully composted. So that means that if they end up in the environment, they will actually just not be, you know, degrading, sorry. So I think it's important that we understand the difference moving forward, seeing bioplastics and papers as a more sustainable alternative.
Thank you. That was a really good response. And what recommendation would you make to any individual consumer on this call to be able to reduce their plastic pollution? What are the easy wins that one can do?
So I do believe that all of us can do something, but it's also true that the pressure should not be put in consumers anymore. It should be put in the industries or governments. And I think that's happening somehow. But we need to see at this as, you know, I'll give you an example that we all use. If the tap in your kitchen was leaking with loads of water, you will go and close the tap first and then clean up the mess later. The same goes with plastic pollution. You need to go and stop it at the source and then try to then recycle what's been already in the environment or collect what's already in the environment. So we as consumers, and as much as we can, we should just try to avoid basically single-use plastics, because that's also what we find mostly in the environment. I haven't mentioned at all because I didn't have time, but also our clothes are made of synthetic fibers as well, so like nylon, other fibers, polyester. So those are microfibers that will then be shed into the environment. So just being mindful of what we buy, how much we buy, and then just try to avoid single-use plastics or plastic-based fibers as much as we can.
So thank you very much. Please stay with us until the end. We'll have some more questions for you. Okay, so still on the topic of single-used materials, we're now going to move on to shock cushioning foams. So these, you find them in your delivery parcels, and they are often not recyclable or recycled, but there is some research underway to change this. Before we call our next panelist, we're going to throw one more poll to test your knowledge on the topic.
Yeah, as already said, it is about alternatives for fossil fuel-based or plastic-based foams for shock cushioning. And the question is, what have you already seen, heard of, touched on in your life? What do you know of? What comes in your parcels to your electronic goods or others? There's one I forgot. It is air, because I had airbags. I forgot that, but the airbags are actually plastic wrapped. So, we have for choice, we have popcorn, other pop starch products, fungi, cellulose-based products. We didn't specify the cellulose-based. Okay, it's still moving here. I see a strong leader here, which goes, I think, along with the audience we have in the meeting. Okay, I close the sondage and the survey, and I will share it with you. And you can see cellulose-based. You have already had, I guess my understanding would be that you have had packages where things were packaged so that monitors or screens would not be broken when they come to you in cardboard, intelligent folding. But actually, I should have phrased the question better if you are aware of cellulose-based shock cushioning products. But with this is the result. 80% said they already touch upon cellulose-based, but they've also had popcorn and other pop starch products, and fungi only 13%. So with that, I hand it back to you, Angela.
Thank you. So I'd like to invite our final speaker, Paula Martinez, to join us. Paula Martinez is a senior specialist in business development, and she works for Stora Enso's Innovation Center. Stora Enso, for those who don't know them, is a leading global provider of fiber and biomass-based renewable products, and they're based in Sweden, Finland. Please, Paula, please join us, and the floor is yours. If you could tell us a little bit more about what alternatives exist out there.
Thank you. Let's see, I have a presentation. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So I start with my presentation with a picture from New Year's Day 2021. And my oldest daughter is looking at the littering after the night's celebrations. And she had just started to learn about packaging and materials and the consequences they have when they end up in our natural environment. And I think the most recent estimations are that 11 million tons of plastics leak into our oceans each year. So that means just during my short presentation, another 100 tons of plastics have leaked out. And as several have mentioned already, a couple of weeks ago, the UN agreed to negotiate on a treaty to end plastic pollution. So a historical deal that will change our current path. I'm sure many of you have noticed that packaging today has become more paper-based. So, but if you have ordered a product online that requires additional protection, then inside that corrugated box, you often find plastic foams that provides the cushioning. And here is where we want to make a change. We want to provide packaging that is fully bio-based, biodegradable, and recyclable, in addition to having this high performance. And our solution is Papira. And the next slide. The technology of Papira originates from university research, a university called KTH here in Sweden, and a startup called Cellutech. And we started Cellutech in 2013 with the mission to commercialize cutting-edge wood-based materials by bringing research ideas from the academia and bringing them closer to the market. And back then we had several different types of materials. All of them were cellulose-based. And eventually it became clear that one of them had huge potential. And so 3 years ago now, Cellutech was acquired by Stora Enso, the renewable materials company. Papira is a bio-based foam made from pulp fibers. So the raw materials are inherently biodegradable, which has been very important for us from the beginning, because we all know that packaging materials tend to end up in places where they shouldn't be. The production process of Papira is environmentally friendly. It doesn't use any solvents or hazardous chemicals. The process is water-based and only use air to produce the foam. And the material is lightweight, important for transportation, but it also has this good cushioning performance, so ideal for protective packaging. And in the next slide, some examples of packaging applications are, for instance, electronics, home appliances, high value consumer products, but also thermal packaging, because the foam has very good insulating properties. And from the start, when we developed this, we have always thought about how consumers can dispose of the foam easily. So that's why we have tailored it to be recyclable together with paper and paperboard materials. So you can put everything into the same paper recycling bin. And so even though this is a new material, a new innovation, there's already existing waste management systems in place globally. And this is, really the key benefit, because it enables the use of the valuable reuse of the valuable cellulose fibers and a circular material flow. And in the next slide, last year in November was a very big milestone for us when the Papira pilot plant started its production. And this year, we will, together with customers, perform pilot trials to validate the performance of the material in different applications. And so we have a really exciting time ahead of us, and I'm really grateful to have a strong and dedicated team, because we all know that it takes quite a while to commercialize innovations. So finally, Papira is a bio-based, biodegradable, and recyclable alternative to plastic foams. It is a scientific innovation that will contribute to circular bioeconomy, and it is a material that we have invented as a long-term solution for generations to come. So thank you so much, and please reach out if you have any further questions.
Thank you so much, Paula. Yes, please do reach out with questions through the chat. We still have Paula with us for a few minutes. Paula, maybe while we wait for questions to come through, so we hear that you're now in pilot tester phase, and we look forward to this product soon hitting the market, hopefully. Who will be the first to use it? What will be the first applications in your view of this product?
Well, I would like to disclose the first customers of this material, but I look forward to when we can. But it will be within products that are more fragile and are using plastic foams today, such as styrofoam or polyethylene foam or polyurethane foam.
Fantastic. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more about how you shape the material into its final shape? How do you make that happen?
Yes, so I can actually show the material here. It looks like this, so it's flat. And the way you can shape it is that you cut into the foam with different cutting techniques that converters of plastic foams, we can use the same equipment that they have in order to cut and then build a 3D shape around a product. So it gives that tailored shape.
Okay. If anyone else has questions, please do put them in the chat. Could that product be also used as an insulation material, or is there any research in that space as well?
Yes. So our first target is within packaging and protective packaging, but we also see that the material has very good insulating properties, similar to EPS, for instance. So in packaging, there's also applications where you want to keep products cold or frozen, and in those insulating boxes, Papira could also be used. But for other applications in construction, for instance, where you have insulation, that is more of a future application for us.
Okay, it's not the question for me, but it's always a question I also like to ask is about the cost. How does it compare cost-wise with styrofoam or starch-based puffed products or others that are competitors, where would you range it? I mean, compared to these products, are you aiming for the lowest or the medium range, or where are the costs compared to the competitors?
Well, when talking about plastic foams, there are a range, and EPS, for example, or styrofoam are really, really cheap. And then we have other foams that are medium and even more expensive. And we see that we can be competitive with other foams, but styrofoam is difficult. It is a challenge to come down in those prices. But we're not competing with price, but more of other sustainability properties.
Thank you. We have one last question from our end, actually. You didn't mention, I think, the ratio of virgin versus recycled fiber that goes into the product. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Yes, good question. And here is one material that we actually need currently to use virgin fibers. So it is virgin fibers in the product. We are investigating the use of recycled fibers as well, but it is a challenge because there's many impurities in those fibers. So the properties are not the same, and we need the strength of the foam. So it is virgin.
Oh, okay.
Another question linked to the virgin fibers, which just came to my head. There are other cellulose-based materials like starch, or I mean corn husks, or other materials which are having some kind of cellulose in there. Can you switch the material? Why do you focus on wood? Is it because of the properties of wood? So why did you go for choosing as basis for the raw material wood at the moment?
Well, it has to do with the research on wood-based materials that we did from the start. So everything, all the different materials were wood-based, but cellulose cellulose fibers is what the technology is based on. So we also have been looking into different fiber sources. But we see that the now in entering, in scaling, fibers from wood is what we know, and we'll see in the future if we can apply the technology on other fiber sources as well.
I have one comment from Jeremy, and I'm really looking forward to meetings in person because it will be so much easier to just chip in and give your comments and also to discuss things. Jeremy just stated that the photo of littering reminds him of the huge role we have for education, especially in homes and schools, in order to prevent these kind of images that you have just shown at the beginning with your daughter and the water and the New Year celebration. So I think this is a point well taken, and we all know that, yeah, going through school, I was the one who was educating my parents at home, being brought up in the 80s. So the education took place at school, and I brought home the idea of sorting glass and metal and paper. So okay, I think that's it from the chat here, and I give it back to you, Angela.
Yes, thank you very much. So to close this discussion, we wanted to call back all our panelists, if hopefully they're still with us. If you could put your videos back on so we can see you, and we're going to have a little open discussion about how do we close the loop based on everything we've heard today. This is opportunity, of course, to send us all your questions in the chat for the panelists, but we'll open up with our questions of our own. So I know we have a bit of a group of informed customers on the line. It's probably not a general population that we're talking to now, but however, What would be your general advice to consumers on this call seeking to make more sustainable purchasing decisions, focusing specifically on closing this loop? Does anyone want to take that question, or should I direct it to someone instead? Let me see if I can see some hands up. Super, Alicia, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as just to add to what I said before, I suppose that it's very hard to be like 100% sustainable. We will always be having a footprint on the planet. But regarding plastics, for example, the most important key message is to just try to avoid them as much as possible. If you have to buy something, to try to reuse your consumption of what you want to buy, and the amount of times that you need to buy that product, or look for an alternative if it's possible.
Yes, thank you. Not easy to be a consumer nowadays, I have to say. Paula, do you have any advice from your end?
Yes, I think just be curious about materials. And I think going back to children in schools, and they're really, really good today at educating children and on packaging, and they're learning about what is plastic, what is glass, and combinations of materials, and be curious and try to read on the packaging what it says, try to choose packaging that is more sustainable.
Thank you. Michelle, did you want to jump in on that one as well?
I think that it's very important to understand that there are quite a few cases where companies like Starbucks in the fast food industry or others have marketing messages to their customers through social media, through other means, to let their customers know that their products are recyclable and made from sustainable products. And they come up with reports, and people in the paper and pulp and paper board industry do the same. And so they communicate to their audiences, shareholders, investors, that they are working on closed loop or recyclability issues all the time. And for the customer to be able to have access to that and to be educated is very important. Unfortunately, when you order something online, it's not always obvious that you know what's going to be in the box to protect the product that you're buying. So communication is very important. And the more companies such as Amazon communicate to the customers what they're using as shipping material, obviously it's cardboard boxes, but what's actually inside is going to give the customer the power to decide what they buy and how they buy it.
Michelle, would you be able to build a little bit on that and help us understand a bit more the role of certification when it comes to helping consumers being able to make purchasing decisions with regards to fiber-based products? Do you have any views on that? Any insights you could share?
Yes. Many years ago, there was a lot of discussion as to what was going to be used as a logo on a product for recycling, reusing, and making sure that it was a standardized and well accepted or adhered to concept. And there are different certification processes around the world, PFEC and SFI, Sustainable Forestry Initiatives, such that, from the forest all the way through to the actual product production aspect, there are certain processes and rules that you have to follow. And so it becomes important that there are rules to adhere to make sure that the environment is protected, that the consumer is given a product that they know is not going to be harmful to the environment, and they can basically trust that certification process. And some of them are very difficult to adhere to, and it's not everybody that can get the certification. So to have that standard, it's almost like having a global law that says, well, this is the rules and the regulations that companies in the industry has to adhere to in order to provide that product to a consumer. And I think it's very important to have that. And the more certifications, not necessarily better, but to at least have the one or two that are out there that are globally based. Yes, very much needed today to make sure that we are protecting the environment.
Thank you very much for that brilliant answer. Just a call again for putting all your questions in the chat. We still have our speakers with us for a few minutes, so we still have time. Now let's move on to, we gave advice to consumers. Now, if we could give advice to forest companies such as Stora Enso or Smurfit Kappa that were with us today, where should they put their focus and their money, can I say, to really help close this loop? What is their responsibility in this space? Where would you like to see the focus in the coming years? I think LT is no longer with us, but maybe Paula, would you want to take this one as a starting point? Where would you like Stora Enso to put additional focus potentially? If there's still room for improvement, that is.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's a big question. And I think continue to communicate on these certifications that we have, and the importance also of sustainable forest management, and how we also can use our resources more efficiently in order to make use of the raw materials that we have. I'm sorry, could you elaborate more on the question?
Apologies, we were chatting here. So the question was really just, where should big corporations be focusing? Is it innovation, or should they be rather working downstream to try to increase, the recovery of recycled materials? Well, maybe we should say where are the biggest hurdles there in your view to really be able to reach to close the gap. I think at the moment we're only 1% of the global economy is circular from my memory. So how do we get this 99% circularity?
Yes, I think really to collaborate and ensure that we have these harmonized systems and how to collect waste, and also so that we have a common system for this, because it's in Europe, it is very different in every country. So that is one part, but also in the innovation, there's a lot of things going on, but it takes a lot of time to commercialize these new ideas. But I think knowing that it takes a long time to develop these innovations and have long-term targets on these is important.
Thank you, Paula. All of the above then. And Michelle or Alicia, would you like to add to that if you had a chance to give advice to the forest sector, what would it be? Go ahead, Alicia.
Yeah, well, from my perspective of becoming from research right now, I suppose what's also very important is to that any new product that is already in the market or it's going to be in the future needs to be properly tested for true biodegradability, compostability, but also have proper toxicological tests being done, and that information should be made available if possible to, like Paula was saying, inform consumers with what they are purchasing. In terms of packaging, it's, sometimes in some cases, perhaps the packaging is not so necessary. In other cases, obviously with delivering stuff, and obviously it needs to come in a packaging. So we need to be realistic there as well. But yeah, definitely research needs to be linked to industry and just general public to better inform the alternatives.
Thank you. Michelle, did you want to also give us some closing remarks on the topic?
Yes, just to say that a lot of times the new generation, the kids in schools, when they're introduced to concepts of recycling, they bring it home, like Florian mentioned earlier. And so corporate advertising from large pulp and paper companies to the audience, whether it be society in general through social media or through television or through billboards, advertising campaigns, can always educate people. But the schools are a good place to get the concept of recycling and the whole knowledge of sustainability ingrained in kids right from the get-go, so that you start almost with a fresh slate, and that will be organic growth.
Thank you. Paula, please go ahead.
Yes, and I also think to add when developing new products to ensure that it is easily recyclable and easily for consumers also to understand how they can dispose of it, and for the recycling facilities that it's not a material that makes it or disturbs the repulpability, for example, or the recyclability. So really thinking from the start on how the composition of the material is in order to enable the recycling.
Thank you, Paula. So we're almost reaching the top of the hour. So I really wanted to send a warm thank you to our 5 speakers for being with us today and for showing such insightful and diverse presentations on the topic. I also wanted to thank UNEC and FAO for hosting this session on such an important topic. And a reminder that today is the International Day of Forests, and it's really a chance to reflect on this incredibly important role that forest and forest products play at a time where we need to decarbonize as soon as possible. So, mark the day by taking a stroll in the forest, or just, do not take them for granted. So thank you very much for being with us, and I'll hand back to Florian for some final remarks.
Thank you, Angela. And I'm just reading the last comment in the chat, which is reuse, reduce, refuse, recycle. Happy International Forest Day. I couldn't have put it into better words than Marion Carman from FSC. I want to thank again the speakers, but also to Angela for coming over. The UNECE is working a lot on circularity and circular economy and the forest sector in the circular economy, but also the World Business Council with its forest solution groups on your end with the big companies. We're all going in the right direction with reducing the footprint even further, even if only 3 to 5% of a product brought to us, as we heard in the morning from Oti, is used for the packaging and the carbon footprint, and to protect the 95% of the product of the carbon footprint of that. I want to also to thank my colleagues who have helped to find all the speakers. It worked very well. I'm very happy with the discussion, even though we couldn't open up the microphones, even though we couldn't meet in person. I hope that next time we will really be able to meet in the room together and have a beer afterwards, and to spread the word about how many things forest products can do for us in our daily lives and our consumption patterns. Also, great thank you to the technical team. It was a big trial for us to do the polls. It worked like a charm. So it's very nice to interact with you, to pick a little bit your brains and to get feedback on some of these things and to see where the opinions are. We're going to use that certainly more in the future. And also big thanks to the interpreters who enabled the translation into or interpretation into French and Russian. With that, I thank everybody and I wish you a very happy International Forest Day and a great afternoon.